WLRN Video presents.
Hello, dear sisters, and welcome to another full-length WLRN interview. My name is April No, and I am very proud to welcome our next guest, Jennifer Lahl, back to the WLRN airwaves. Jennifer is the founder and president of the Center for Bioethics and Culture Network and a co-founder of the international group Stop Surrogacy Now. Jennifer's award-winning documentaries include Breeders, a Subclass of Women, and Big Fertility, both of which expose the brutal realities of surrogacy in the United States. Here, Jennifer explains the medical risks surrogacy poses for the women involved and refutes common arguments made to justify the exploitation of women as wombs. She is interviewed by WLRN member Aurora Linnea. Please check out the description for the appropriate links and enjoy the interview.
Yeah, sure, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, no, I don't mind at all. So in the US, surrogacy looks different depending on which state you're in. Because the United States doesn't have federal legislation speaking to addressing surrogacy like France, all of France, surrogacy is not permitted, like Italy, like Germany. It really varies from state to state. So for example, California, where I live, is very surrogacy friendly. The laws are written in such a way in California that are very friendly to what I call the purchasers, the people who are buying eggs, buying sperm, renting wombs, buying the babies. And the laws in California are permissive and very much in line with what Big Fertility wants, the industry that makes money off of this. Whereas South Dakota, for example, has no law. They tried to address it. They've never been able to pass laws. So the law is just kind of silent. And that usually is good in one way because it does not incentivize Big Fertility to set up shop in South Dakota because there's no laws protecting their business. But it is also bad in that, women are left vulnerable in case they do enter into surrogacy arrangements in South Dakota because it's not banned in South Dakota. So it really will look differently based on what are the particular state laws. And we have on our website a state-by-state map on surrogacy. So people who want to know what is the law in my state. And it's a moving target because every year we have more legislation or more states taking up the battle. But it's clear that the federal government has not expressed any interest or desire to work on any kind of federal laws around surrogacy, which on one hand for me is almost preferable because the worst thing would be for the federal government to step in and allow surrogacy under some kind of a regulated model. Just if you think of like prostitution, we don't want prostitution, so we don't want it regulated. We just don't want it. And I fear, and a couple of very challenging court cases involving surrogate mothers have made their way all the way up to the Supreme Court. And so far, the Supreme Court has always opted not to hear those cases. And people always say to me, oh, are you really sad that the Supreme Court didn't hear, for example, Melissa Cook's surrogacy case? And I said, actually, no, because be careful what you wish for. What if the Supreme Court heard the case and ruled against the surrogate mother? And then we would have surrogate, Supreme Court legislation, we'd have precedent in the law that would forever be harmful. So we work like crazy in the United States and abroad to just kind of educate people on why we oppose surrogacy in order to sort of get ahead of people saying, well, let's address all the problems of surrogacy with some kind of good law. And, we can probably talk more about that. In that there's no way to dress this up and make it good.
Yes. So I guess I'm curious, in California, which you say is sort of like a destination for surrogacy and really encourages the industry, what does that look like? So how are women brought into the industry? Who are the women who are serving developing or participating in the industry as surrogates, and who's doing the buying? Like, what are the dynamics of that?
Right. Well, so there's many layers to how it looks. One is just the, like in the United Kingdom, you can't advertise for surrogacy, even though they allow surrogacy, altruistic, can be paid. They have a law that says you can't advertise this. So we have no law in California. So the advertising is, come to California, get a baby, have a vacation at Disneyland. We have all the glamorous Hollywood, we have a lot of, posh universities here. So if you're looking for a particular egg donor, we've got Stanford, we've got UC Berkeley, we've got, the University of California, Los Angeles, University of Southern California. So there's all this glitzy marketing, to just encourage people to come here as a destination. And as far as the European context, Chinese couples come overwhelmingly to California. Surrogacy is illegal in China. Buying and selling eggs is legal in China, but it's not illegal for the Chinese to come here. So there's an added layer of advertisement too. If you have a child born in the United States, they're immediately a US citizen, which is very attractive to countries like China, because the Chinese will say, wow, we have a baby now who's ours. We live in China, but our baby's a US citizen. And that creates a nice path to citizenship here. And it creates opportunities for their child when their child grows up to go to our universities if they want to go to Harvard or, Yale, because they're a US citizen. So that's another area of the sort of the draw to come here. Again, because the laws are very friendly to the purchasers, you don't have to worry about in South Dakota if you've hired a surrogate where there's no laws protecting you and the surrogate decides to keep the baby. In California, we have pre-birth orders, and most surrogates will sign away, waive their maternal rights to the child before they've even had the embryo transferred into them. So before they're even pregnant, they've already signed a legal document that says, I have no rights to this child, which again makes it very appealing to people who are spending a lot of money and they want a baby to know that they're not going to have any kind of legal issues once the child is born, in assuming custody and rights. So that child immediately is born with whoever bought the baby, their name's on the birth certificate. So they don't even have to go. Some states in the US, you have to go through a formal adoption. So after the baby is born, the people who paid the surrogate, to have the baby, then has to legally, formally adopt the child to get their names on the birth certificate. So it just streamlines it in so many areas that are appealing to people who are spending a lot of money to get a baby.
Are organizations that advocate for or lobby for surrogacy sort of pushing for that kind of policy in more states? I would imagine that's kind of the dream, right?
Absolutely. They will, well, let's use New York State. During the height of the COVID pandemic, when Governor Cuomo was the governor, he, in their budget bill, which by law, by their constitution, has to be passed every year, you can cram a lot of other laws into the budget package to get it passed under a tight deadline. If we don't pass this bill tonight, New York State employees won't be paid tomorrow because we haven't approved the budget. So he did that in New York State. And the argument by State Senator Brad Hoylman, who's a gay man who's married to a man, they've come twice to California to hire surrogates, buy eggs to have their children. The argument was, why do we have to go all the way to California? Why do we have this extra burden of having to, leave our state? Why can't we do this in the state? So you'll see a lot of arguments of, why do we have to go through an adoption? Why can't we have pre-birth orders so that we can streamline? Wyoming did that, I think 2 years ago now. They removed that so that the child born of surrogacy immediately becomes the child of the intended parents who hired the surrogate. So you'll see those kind of arguments, but the arguments are always in favor, again, of the moneyed interest. They're never in favor of the surrogate mother. You never see a state saying, let's pass a waiting period of 90 days or even 6 weeks, which, technically 6 weeks after giving birth, that's your postpartum period, that for 6 weeks, you're in that postpartum category. At least let the mother, heal and get through the first 6 weeks postpartum, and then surrender her birthrights. If you look at the adoption model, a woman who has made the decision to surrender, give away, her baby, put her baby up for her, all the language just sounds kind of demeaning when you're talking about human beings. You surrender them or you give them up, or our adoption laws are written in a way that that woman does not separate and waive her maternal rights until after the baby's born. But you'll never see you'll never see a state saying, we acknowledge that surrogacy is risky to the health of the mother, maybe the health of the child. Let's offer $1 million life insurance policy to surrogate mothers. So, or medical insurance that lasts for 2 or 3 or 4 years when she might have complications, 6 months down the road or a year later from the pregnancy that she doesn't realize at the time of. But you'll never see pieces of legislation written that protect the surrogate mother, the egg donor, the children born of these arrangements.
Yes. Not very profitable to protect those parties.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess on that note, what are some of the major medical risks for any of those individuals? So egg donors, the surrogates themselves, and for the children being born through this
Sure.
practice.
Well, let's talk about the surrogate first, and then if I forget, remind me to talk about the egg donor, because they're different risks. And I like to remind people that for the United States being such a superpower on the world stage, we have already horrible maternal morbidity and mortality rates. For a country like the United States, we should be quite frankly ashamed of. And when I say morbidity and mortality, morbidity is just health complications related to pregnancy, and mortality is women who die in childbirth. We still have horrible rates when you compare us to other countries around the world. So we already know that pregnancy is not without risk, and that this notion that, pregnancy is just like, something that women have been doing forever. Yes, but it's risky. And we're only learning recently, since we moved in the olden days, and I hate this term, we used the words traditional surrogacy, which I say there's really nothing traditional about it. But the traditional surrogate is the woman who is pregnant with her own child, that's entered into a contract that when that child is born, she will surrender it to whoever. So we've moved from that to the model of gestational surrogacy, which is where the woman is pregnant with somebody else's egg-created embryo. So it could either, in the case of a gay couple, the egg has clearly come from an egg donor, not because there's not a wife or a partner, a female partner in that situation. Or in the case of she's a surrogate for perhaps an infertile heterosexual couple, it might be that woman's egg that the surrogate is then, pregnant. And we're seeing now, because we've shifted more to that model, and because we're having more and more surrogacy arrangements, children born this way, we're finding in the medical literature that we know that these surrogate pregnancies, gestational surrogate pregnancies, are high risk. And we think a couple of things are going on. One is, if you think of like organ donation, you seem like a lovely person, Aurora, and I'm sure if you needed a kidney transplant, I would consider donating my kidney to you. But it doesn't work that way, because you might reject my kidney, and we don't just go around putting anybody's kidney into somebody because they want to help. There's this thing called tissue typing and organ rejection. And so in the surrogate mother, her body immediately has an immune response to the pregnancy, because her body says, this is not my baby. This is a foreign object in me. And so you'll often see surrogates are put on medication, like steroids and stuff, to sort of mitigate those inflammatory complications that she's having. Surrogates are often at risk because they've had multiple C-sections. Overwhelmingly, C-section delivery is how a lot of surrogate babies are born. Even though, again, when you think of regular women, we've tried to move away from C-sections, because we know that C-sections are risky to mother and child. Surrogates overwhelmingly still deliver by surrogacy, by C-section. And surrogates often carry multiples. So you have these compounding risk factors. But I do like to remind people that we've had surrogate mothers die in the United States that weren't carrying multiples. We've had surrogate mothers die that were carrying twins, but that risk is not necessarily attached to whether it was a C-section, whether it was multiples, or whether it was this immune response to rejecting a foreign embryo. It's kind of all those things. And then we do see also that surrogates, in my own research, it's not uncommon to interview and speak to a surrogate that's given birth to 6, 7, 8, 9 children, because she's had her own children and she's done 2 or 3 surrogate pregnancies, and maybe between her own children and her surrogate pregnancies, she's given birth to a couple of sets of twins or even triplets. We've had surrogates pregnant with triplets. So, that compounds risk. And especially when the woman's body has not had adequate amount of time to recover. So there was one surrogate who died in Boise, Idaho, and she was carrying twins, and the twins died as well. And she had had really close interval pregnancies. And I think part of her complication, because she died of a placental abruption, where the placenta just abruptly tears away from the uterine wall, and you just have massive hemorrhage, and it's really almost impossible to save that woman's life and the babies unless it actually happens in an operating room, which it never happens in an operating room. So she was at home when it happened, and by the time she got to the hospital, she had bled out. But I think that was because her body hadn't had ample time to heal. And she was now carrying, at that point, that was, I think, if she'd given birth to the twins, she would have given birth to 6 children. And she'd had several C-sections. And the human body can only take so much. And when you look at some of these surrogates who are what I call serial surrogates, and they do it again and again and again, because one of them, the money, and they love being pregnant, they love helping, and all the reasons, there's all these layers of risk. Now for the egg donor, it's a little bit different. And keep in mind, egg donors and surrogates take fertility drugs in order to unnaturally do what our bodies naturally do. So for the egg donor, she has immediately exposed herself to short-term risk because she's taking high-dose fertility drugs and putting her ovaries into sort of a hyperdrive mode to produce lots and lots and lots of eggs, which again, our bodies are not meant to produce lots and lots and lots of eggs. But because of the financial components, if you're paying an egg donor, say $10,000 or $15,000, you don't want 1 egg or 2 eggs. You want 20 or 30 or whatever. So those drugs and that putting her ovaries into hyperdrive puts her into what is often called a condition called ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. And the ovaries get big like grapefruits. There's a lot of fluid, there's a lot of swelling. You can see in their chats, they're talking to each other about how they look like they're 9 months pregnant, they can't buckle their jeans, get their pants on. Some of them talk about being short of breath because there's so much extra fluid that, and the fluids in their bellies, and that puts pressure on your lungs. So they have all those short-term risks. And in our film, Exploitation, 2 of the women had a stroke immediately in that short-term phase of being the egg donation process. Then there's the risk of the anesthesia and the actual surgery to retrieve the eggs. In our film, one of the women, when she went into the operating room to have her eggs retrieved, they accidentally nicked an artery, but they didn't pick it up right away. So she was in recovery, and she was a medical student, right? You want smart, pretty medical student eggs. When she was in the recovery room, she knew enough from her medical school training that something was wrong. She was in so much pain, she couldn't stand up, she was weak. They took her back into the OR and they found that she had been bleeding for like 6 hours. So they had to repair that bleed. So those are the kind of short-term risks that these women have. Longer term, I know a lot of egg donors who've gone on to struggle with their own fertility issues. And so, even though you'll see in all the advertisement, your fertility will not be harmed or damaged. That's just untrue. And then also longer term is just the unknown and the known cancer risks. So, one of the published research articles I worked on with 2 of my colleagues, Dr. Jennifer Snyder, whose daughter was a 3-time egg seller who went on and died of cancer. She was the lead author in that. And we just reported a case report on women who were otherwise healthy who went on and developed as very young women breast cancer. And we know young women don't normally get breast cancer. And we know that egg donors are screened out for a history of breast cancer because nobody's going to pay $15,000 to an egg donor who has a history or a family history of breast cancer or any cancer for that matter. So the egg donor has those immediate short-term risks and then the longer term risks too.
Wow. And infants born out of surrogacy also are predisposed to a lot of different health risks and conditions as well. Isn't that true?
Yeah, and it's infants that are born out of assisted reproductive technology in general. So whether they're born to a surrogate mother or to a woman who has infertility and undergoes IVF to have her own children. So we're seeing in the medical literature, again, it's because it's like what we know about the risk to surrogate pregnancies. It takes time to get data, and it takes time to gather a large enough sample size to have meaningful data. And so we're finally at that stage where, I tweeted it yesterday. I think it was yesterday. It was the anniversary of the birth of the first test tube baby. It was Louise Brown's baby. So I think she's 44 now. So it's been 44 years since we first had the first IVF baby. And then, obviously 44 years ago, she was one of just a few because it was still in its infancy, and now it's really taken off. So we have a lot more sample size. So we're seeing in the medical literature that children who are created through assisted reproductive technology are exhibiting things that, higher rates of particular kinds of cancer, higher rates of obesity. When you start studying children, and if you're looking at an obesity study and you try to find out what are the variables, and you start seeing, well, wow, we've got this many in our sample size, and this subset of them were all created through assisted reproduction. You start making kind of conclusions in your research that that people need to know about this. You need to be informed if you're going to use this technology, that it may, these fertility drugs might be harmful to your health, but also harmful to the health of the children that will be born of this technology. And of course, the surrogate mothers take the fertility drugs, which have risks, and are carrying an embryo that was created through assisted reproductive technology because they're not having sex, which is the other way to get pregnant. And so those risks are there for both infertile women and surrogate mothers.
Something that I think is really interesting that you have sort of touched on is, the egg donors, the women and girls who are targeted are like the university students you're talking about, like Stanford, smart, beautiful medical students, right? But that's not the same women who are targeted for acting as surrogates. Isn't that true? They're like separate classes of women.
Well, yeah, it's absolutely true. And think about, the egg donor is entering into an arrangement that's probably going to, at the minimum, inconvenience her for 4 to 6 weeks of taking drugs, giving herself shots, going in for a couple of ultrasounds to measure how her ovaries are doing, and then the actual retrieval process. So in about 6 weeks, she can make, say 10, 15 or higher. If she's, Ivy League and the couple is very wealthy and really wants her eggs, she might be able to fetch a higher price. So, and she's not going to want to do a 9-month pregnancy. She's not going to want to be walking around on the campus with her friends and going out on the weekends to parties, in her maternity clothes. And so the surrogate mother is a much different profile. And because we're not in our delusion of the marketing and the designer baby that we're creating, we're not using her genetics. So we're not after the Ivy League surrogate mother. And the Ivy League surrogate mother probably isn't going to want to also do a 9-month pregnancy. So the profile is going to be a lower income woman in the United States because we just don't have that kind of abject poverty like we have in countries like India and Singapore. But we do have, medium to low income women and women that are living, by the US standards on the poverty line. And by most of the agency's requirement, she has to already have had one of her own children. And the reason for that is that they want to know that she's not had complicated pregnancies, and that she's otherwise healthy and she can do the job. And if you're a lower income woman, you're not going to get any kind of notion in your mind that you want to change your mind and keep the baby. Because the number one reason you're doing this is because you need the money, and you're not doing it because you want more children per se, or maybe you want more children, but you want your own children. You really are doing it because you need the money. So in the US, a prime target is our military wives, because they fit that profile. They're lower income. They typically have married young and often have one or two children. They're unemployable or underemployable because they have to move a lot because their husband's in the military, partners in the military. So it's, when you try to get meaningful work, a lot of times people will say, oh, your husband's in the military. We don't really want to spend time training you because in a few months you'll be off to some other state. So this woman is sort of the perfect profile, if you will. And the military wife is already sort of service oriented, serving God, serving country. Her husband serves our nation. Thank you for your service. So they're just sort of an easy target, that big fertility targets.
Yeah. With it being something that women are largely doing for money, the ways that I have read of a defense of surrogacy that I have seen a lot, coming from many different camps, is that it is a form of employment or work or a vocation, like anything else that a woman might do, and that if we recognize it as work, then you can make it non-exploitative, through like workers' rights reforms or regulation of the industry. What is your take on that argument?
Yeah, I hear that a lot. And there's actually a book out there that I read, Wombs in Labor, written by an Indian feminist woman, who makes that argument that, surrogates ought to be able to unionize and organize and barter for higher wages, and, that she, sees it as work. And, it's sort of, I, for one, I don't see pregnancy as work. You don't grow up as a little girl and go, I want to be a paid surrogate for my job when I grow up. What do I study in college to have that as a career option? You can't advance, you don't get promoted. When you think of other jobs, if you do a good job and you're a Starbucks barista or something, the next thing you might get promoted to store manager, or, the head buyer of what kind of croissants and muffins are we going to offer our customers in the morning. So you can't advance up the corporate ladder in surrogacy. So it's not meaningful work. If you truly have a job, surrogates age out. You reach a point where you're too old to sell your eggs or to rent your womb. And not unlike other jobs that you can do till, up until your 80s or till whenever you choose to retire or quit, your body will age out. And so you can't do your job anymore if we're gonna play that surrogate. But I just reject it as notion, I can't be a professional organ donor and sell my organs. Eventually I'm going to run out, if I try to go to the blood bank every week and give blood, if I try to donate my skin to burn patients and give my kidney, and, eventually you'll, so you don't make these kind of arguments that, parceling out your body and giving bits and pieces of your body away is a job. So I think it's just kind of absurd. But you don't see people really pushing back on that. And it's probably the same thing could be said in the argument of prostitution, and the people who say that this is sex work and that's meaningful work that women choose, and let them choose to do this.
Yeah, I mean, there are obviously a lot of parallels between the way that prostitution and surrogacy are framed.
Exactly.
And you don't see that. I mean, there is an industry in the United States of plasma sale, right? And a lot
Breast milk
people
sales.
living in poverty do supplement their income with that, but you don't see people come in and talk about what a great what a great job that is for people.
And people are a little bit grossed out if you talk about the man who serially sells his sperm. You know, there's kind of a yuck. But then when you hear about women who are selling their breast milk, you kind of go, oh, isn't that nice? You know, because women are doing it in babies, and you know, breast milk is so good for babies, and what could be wrong? But yeah.
Yeah, no, it's interesting how the commodification and sale of women and women's bodies is always so much more acceptable to people in general.
Yeah.
You are listening to WLRN.
We were just talking about the defense of surrogacy as work and how that kind of collapses. Another one that I'll often see is that where the language of reproductive rights is invoked. And so women should have the choice to be surrogates, and any attempts to ban surrogacy represent an infringement of women's rights to choose how to dispose of their bodies, right? And then also there'll be the claim that everyone has the right to choose how they wish to become parents. And so surrogacy has to exist so that people have the broadest range of options towards becoming a parent. I also saw that the Center for Reproductive Rights supports surrogacy on these grounds, which shocked me, but should not have, I guess. What do you think of people who, or what do you think of the idea that surrogacy should be defended as a choice or constitutes a right that either women have or that people who want to become parents have?
Yeah. Well, and obviously what I'm about to say applies to the people who say egg donors should be able to sell their eggs. Their eggs, you know, and they're not using them, they want to sell them. You know, I think the whole rights language is just one, it's just dangerous because there's no bottom to that. You know, and no one, I always say no one has a right to a child. Now, if you have a child that comes out of your body that is truly your child, you know, genetically, biologically, you know, you have a right for that. And you shouldn't be able, some government can't say, well, that person has a right to build a family any way they want. They can't be able, should be able to come in and take your child away because their rights, you know, usurp your rights, and they're rich and you're poor, and they're educated and you're not. So, you know, even though you've had this child, you know, they have the right to your child. So I just think, you know, I just wrote an article, I just finished reading this article today on the whole area of fertility preservation in transgender medicine. So before men, women, girls, boys transition to the opposite sex, which I don't think you can do. You can pretend to do it, but you can't do it. You know, they're offered to bank their eggs, freeze their sperm, you know, so that when they transition to the other sex, you know, a woman who now lives as a man can go back and get her eggs to hire a surrogate and get a sperm donor so she can have a baby now that she's a man. I mean, it's just, there's no end to the insanity once you frame it as, well, it's my body and I have the right. And the second element of that is, you know, there's plenty of things we don't have a right to do with our body. I can't put myself up on eBay today as a slave and auction myself off to the highest bidder. I can say, well, damn it, it's my body, it's my life. And if I want to sell myself to somebody and be their slave, you know, you can't do that. I mean, these are absurd examples. I mean, I can't sell my kidney. You know, we have a law that forbids the buying and selling of organs. I could say, well, it's my kidney, and if I want to sell it to the highest bidder, I should be able to do what I want. I think the second element here to the rights argument that collapses in my mind is if you say you have a right to it, then that means medicine has an obligation, because you can't do any of this without interfacing with the medical profession. You know, you can't get a surrogate pregnant with your egg and sperm without accessing big fertility and the whole pharmacology, reproductive endocrinology, all those layers of medicine. So then we'd start saying, okay, we're going to force physicians who may want to be conscientious objectors. If I was a breast cancer surgeon and I had a woman who had healthy breasts that came in and said, my gender dysphoria is killing me, and I want you to chop off my breasts or perform a double mastectomy, I think medicine should be able to say, I won't do that. So it's a who's, if this person has the right to these things, then we have to start forcing people to go against their conscience to do things that, that they don't want. Now that gets us into all kinds of uncomfortable, debates in American politics, especially, in the post Roe versus Wade decision of the Supreme Court, because, now we're going to have this, there's going to be doctors who don't want to perform abortions because whatever their personal beliefs are, doctors that are happy to. But again, I think we're best served. It's kind of like free speech. We have to be able to be free human beings to say, I'm not going to do that, even though my professional talent and expertise is in the area of working in reproductive medicine. I don't think you have a right to do that. So, that's some things off the top of my head that I usually kind of raise with people to start getting them to think. But the bottom line is you don't have a right to a child. There's a lot of things I want, but I don't have a right to them. I'd like to not have to work, and just be independently wealthy. Shouldn't I have a right to have part of Elon Musk's money so that I can just not work? I'd like a better car. I'd like to not have cancer, but I have cancer. There's just, the list is endless of the things that we want to turn everything into a right to have.
Yeah. Didn't Elon Musk and his former partner Grimes have a child through surrogacy?
Yes, he's a bad example. Maybe that's why I want to take his money away from him. He also has a son who thinks his son thinks he's a woman now. So yeah. Maybe not the best example of that, but somebody of it, I could just say, well, I have a right to his money.
Yeah.
I want it. It's my right.
Yes.
I have a right to be a Hollywood film producer that has won many Oscars for my films. I haven't won Oscars for my film, but I have a right to.
Well, I mean, that's similar to transgenderism, where, the idea is that you can become something simply by saying that you are.
And then you force other people to believe your narrative or your delusion. And then you force medical professionals to comply. We all just get sucked into because this person has named it and claimed it, and this is my right.
Yes. Does not make for a very high functioning reality.
No.
So can we talk a little bit about the group Stop Surrogacy Now, which has been around since 2015?
A long time. I can't believe that. And you know what? We still haven't stopped surrogacy, but we haven't stopped trying to stop surrogacy. Maybe we should change the name of the campaign to "We're not going to stop trying to stop surrogacy."
that doesn't roll as easily off.
I know. It's not a good slogan. Yeah.
How can you just tell me a little bit about the group? So how did that come into being? And obviously the objective is to stop surrogacy, but what are your sort of strategies to that end? What sort of actions has the group taken so far?
Yeah. Well, first a little bit about, the goal and how it came to be. Sorry, I have a pop-up I'm going to get rid of there. As far as the Stop Surrogacy Now movement, when it was formed, it was, it's been, quite a few years ago now that it came into being. And, it's a small community of people around the world that are working to stop surrogacy, because most of the world is just sort of oblivious to the harms, the risks, the dangers, our concerns about this. if you even sort of get people to sort of think a little bit about it, they kind of go, oh, isn't that nice? And somebody's helping somebody. But, there was this core group of us scattered around the world. Most, I don't want to say all, but mostly women who'd been working hard for decades in women-based issues, whether it be prostitution or sex trade or trafficking, violence, that we just sort of see the connection. This is just one more area where women are at the bottom of the heap again. And so we just sort of, thought, well, let's band together because, I'm here trying to corral 50 states and trying to put out fires in 50 states. Most of my European colleagues, comrades, friends are trying to keep their good laws in place. The French are always trying to undermine and legalize commercial surrogacy. Similar in the United Kingdom, they have a big commission, to rewrite the laws in the United Kingdom to be more, permissive to paying women to be surrogates. And people down in Africa, people in Australia, and we all just thought, we're stronger together, and we can share resources. We can respond to, it's not uncommon for a state or a country to be reviewing their laws and have an open comment period where people can comment. So whoever's considering changing or writing new laws will hear from myriad voices. We didn't want them to just hear from people who are like, yeah, this is great, let's just regulate it and codify it. Those were just real practical things. Sharing information, supporting one another, being a clearinghouse. We advertise if somebody's having an event or a webinar or conference or a book is coming out, that's in this area that we care about in surrogacy. We promote the work of other people. And then what happened, which was great, kind of an organic thing, was we saw spin-offs. So Australia got really organized, and there's a Stop Surrogacy Now Australia. The United Kingdom got really organized, and there's a Stop Surrogacy Now UK. The French have a couple of, there was Liqueur, the body, and then there's, I think it's CIAMS, which is, I hope I'm not misspeaking, but I think it's mostly formed around some strong voices in the lesbian feminist community in France. So we saw these kind of more independent to a country groups, charters, chapters, independent. So now it's a sort of a, kind of a loose network of continuing to support one another, continuing to share information, continuing to weigh in on law commissions and public comment periods. So there's not really, I wouldn't say that Stop Surrogacy Now has its own strategic movement, but it's more of supporting and aligning ourselves with the strategic movements that are happening in the various countries. And we have no budget. So there's no funding here that we're hosting seminars and conferences and we're publishing books and cranking out stuff. It's just sort of a bootstrap, which is a lot of feminist work. A lot of women are just nose to the grind, bone and grit, just saying we're gonna hold the line as fast as we can against these big, powerful money interest lobby groups.
Thank you. What do you see now as sort of the biggest impediment to stopping surrogacy? Is it these is it the industry and the profit there? Is it sort of public inertia? What makes it so hard to stop?
Wow. A couple of things, and one in particular was the media. I mean, one, we're just blacked out of the media. The media just constantly promotes, Khloe Kardashian is now having a baby through surrogacy. Nick Jonas has just had a baby through surrogacy, and he and his wife were talking about having another baby. So it's just, to get any fair, in-depth, really good reporting from mainstream media, it's just a huge impediment. Occasionally, rarely does the New York Times or the Washington Post call. And if they do, it's to get one little soundbite, against this pro. And then Jennifer Lahl says, you're going to burn in hell if you do surrogacy. It's just that kind of framing. So that's a huge impediment. Another huge impediment is there are some powerful people who think and agree with me, but they won't be outspoken because their own personal lives have been touched by surrogacy. They have a brother and his wife who had a baby through surrogacy. Their daughter struggled with infertility and had to buy eggs, so there's this, you have this layer of people who could be influential and be the J.K. Rowlings who are powerful enough to speak out. We got a little bit of that from Gloria Steinem when we were battling the legalization of commercial surrogacy in New York State. But there's just so many more people like that I know, that because their own personal story, they have these people in their own sphere of family influence, friends, that they won't. I mean, I had a famous Hollywood actress who watched one of my movies and she goes, I agree with you, but I'm in Hollywood. If I speak out against surrogacy, I'll never work again, because I'm surrounded by people who have hired surrogates. Money, of course, it's a David and Goliath. It's, big fertility against, bootstrapped, scrappy little feminist groups. We don't have the media megaphone. Lawmakers get really skittish. When you've got state senators like Brad Hoylman, who he and his husband look like amazing, wonderful human beings. We fought a very similar battle in Louisiana, really red state Louisiana, where a very beloved state senator who he and his wife struggled with fertility and had to come to California twice to have their children through surrogacy. Politicians don't like to vote against their colleagues, especially if they really admire them and they want to work together on other issues. You scratch my back, I'll sign your bill if you sign my bill. So there's a lot of horse trading that happens in politics, particularly here in the United States. So kind of, I guess, if you look at, media, arts, entertainment, law, money, finance, all those interests, have no benefit from questioning the narrative, whether it be political, financial, personal. There's, in their minds, there's too much to lose by poking this beast and trying to unravel.
Yeah. Do you think that has or will change at all with the sort of, because there has been some fairly critical media coverage of the industry in Ukraine that has come to light with the war happening there. Do you feel like there's any shift in perspective? I mean, at the same time as that was coming out, I feel like people were still celebrating the Nick Jonas surrogacy. So it's kind of like this cognitive dissonance is allowed to exist. But I feel like people might be seeing surrogacy as a bit more of a less friendly, warm, and cozy thing, given what's happening in Ukraine.
I like to think that I'm overly optimistic and a hopeful person. That's why I've been doing this work I've been doing for 22 years and not given up. However, I don't think a war in Ukraine, only because we had the same thing happen during the COVID pandemic lockdowns with surrogate babies stranded all over the world. In Ukraine, overwhelmingly, there was good media coverage. We had surrogates in America that were caring for babies that were, born for Chinese couples that cared for these babies for, well into the first year of the baby's life. And the COVID pandemics didn't change. We just kind of like, oh, okay, we're on to the next thing now. So I don't really, what I think is going to happen, and I think this is going to happen, that we're going to see in the whole transgender medicine in scare quotes, lawsuits. I think if we get more and more women harmed, which is really sad to say it's going to take that. I mean, why do we wear seatbelts now? Because we had so many people harmed. Why can't we text and drive? Because we have people harmed. In the United States, we're a litigious country, and harm usually gets laws to change. my colleague Callie Fell and I, and a couple of others, we have our research this close to being published on surrogate pregnancies and the risk. And we took 97 American surrogates, gestational surrogates, through our very rigorous peer-reviewed study, and have now crunched all of our data that shows that these are high-risk pregnancies. And I think more and more women who get harmed, and the evidence of the data shows that these are high-risk pregnancies, I think that, if anything, will be the thing that causes people laws to shift. You know, do you really want to make your state like California? I tell all my European colleagues, don't be like California. Hold California up as the state you don't want to be like. Most of Europe says we should be like California. They have wonderful laws. They have great regulation. It works so well out there. And they go, where have most of the surrogates died? California women. You know, so I think it's going to be a harms, lawsuits, and then the children growing up. We're seeing that more in the donor conceived children. Colorado recently just passed a law that the first in our 50 states that says you cannot do anonymous sperm and egg donation, that the child has a right to know who their genetic mother and or father is. I think that will put the skids on it, because a lot of people don't want, you know, they want this sort of facade of, you know, this child just fell out of the sky and here it is. So I think that will also make a lot of people pause when they start seeing the children who are born in these arrangements growing up and speaking out. Yeah.
Well, I hope so. I hate when it's like more people have to get hurt before
I know,
something will stop, but unfortunately,
I know.
it does seem like that is what is necessary before people come around.
Yeah, you know what I saw? I just saw somebody send it to me yesterday, a TikTok video that a surrogate just posted, I think last week. It's really recent, and she just has given birth to twins, and apparently in their agreement with her and the couple that she had the twins for, she was going to be able to hold the babies and, you know, see them and kind of keep in touch, you know, not that she wanted to be heavily involved, but, you know, and the minute she gave birth to the twins, that was all. That, nope, we changed our mind. You can't hold the babies. You can't see them. You know, goodbye. And the comments on the TikTok video that she posted are just awful. You know, to your point, you were hired to do a job. You were paid. Go away. You're dismissed. You know, one woman said, this is the reason why I'm worried about hiring a surrogate to have my children, because when I have the babies, I don't want to see her. I don't want to hear from her. I mean, and just this barrage of people just saying, you have no right to these children. You have no, you were just hired, go away, quit complaining, you know, and it's just, so, you know, those kind of harms. I mean, those are abuse, just harms. And I can't imagine, she's in her postpartum period of just giving birth to twins. And we already know that that's a difficult time for women post-delivery. You know, we have postpartum depression. In my own research that Callie and I did that's coming out soon, we saw that 97 women had more postpartum pregnancy in their surrogate pregnancies than with their own. And we don't know why that is, because that was just a brand new finding. But we think it's because you go home with empty arms, and your whole 9 months you're being prepared, you know, to have this new human. But it will be harms that will change our course of action. We have to end on a happier note, though.
Yes. What would be a happy note that you would like to end on? I mean, I guess, because the question that I had been planning to close on was sort of, what is the major reason that you oppose surrogacy, and that you have been driven to focus so much of your time and energy in life on that? But that seems like it could go into a negative area as well.
Well, maybe I'll try to spin it in a happy answer.
Okay.
Well, I mean,
That sounds
part
great.
of it is just, you know, I always tell people I hate injustice. You know, I hate injustice of the powerful against the weak, the rich against the poor, the medical establishment against the vulnerable, just any kind of way where you have, these power shifts, which are just sort of ripe for injustice. So that's what motivates me. A happy way, I would love to see women of all stripes just stand up and say, we're not going to ask other women to do this for us, because there's a lot of women who rent wombs and buy eggs, so that they can have babies. We care enough about our sisters, and that we care. I care about your young daughter, your son's military wife, that we care. I would love to see major feminist organizations in the United States have very strong policies and voices on this matter. I would love to see Planned Parenthood and the National Organization for Women stand up and say, not on our watch. We're not going to let women be exploited and used like this. That would be just a beautiful landscape. And then I wouldn't care what the laws were. It's kind of like, we don't criminalize smokers, but we've done a really, really, really good job. We need more work to be done on people being educated on the risks of smoking and secondhand smoke, but overwhelmingly people don't do it. And I think here's again another happy, uplifting message. I think people with the right information want to do good things. And so I think if people, I always hope when I do shows like this, I'm reaching maybe hundreds or thousands of new people that we're going to go, oh, I'm against surrogacy now, and I used to think it was great, and that is how we change the world, regardless of what our lawmakers or our courts say.
What ideas do you have for feminists hearing this, who do want to mobilize on this issue? What can we do? Where should we look for what our states? You have a state-by-state guide on Stop Surrogacy Now, but how can we get more active?
Yeah, well, I'm careful because I think we all have different passions. So I don't want to tell everybody, go do this, because some people are like, I'm not good at that, but I'm good at this. So a couple of ideas I like to give people is one, go to our website, cbc-network.org. We do have, if you want to know what your state says on this matter, you could find out, in my state, it's silent. Maybe I like to work on legislation. Maybe I can write to my local state representative. And maybe there's a bill already active in my state that I can either support or oppose. Some people love to write letters to the editor. When there's out here in California, we just had a big story broke last week, I believe. It's a same-sex male couple. They paid for a boy, and now they found out their surrogate's giving birth to a girl, and they're mad and they're suing because they're not getting what they wanted. Well, that's a timely thing in the news that if you want to speak about it or write about it or gather your local group to chat about, see what's happening in the news. We produced 4 documentaries, 2 on egg donation and 2 on surrogacy, that are free on our YouTube channel to watch. Organize a screening. If you are a group that meets together or you want to watch a movie online and talk about it, that's a way to just sort of get people to understand. Because it is, for us, it's just a language, it's an education information deficit. It doesn't take very long for people to hear me speak for like 20 minutes to go, oh, new information. I didn't know that. I didn't know there were risks. I didn't know it was harmful. I didn't know women had died. And then you just, it's like, wow, that was easy. I didn't have to do a little, some kind of wrestling move and pin you down and say, now do you believe? So, there's just so many things that we've tried to provide people as far as resources. But again, to me, I always tell people, play to your strengths, whatever makes you passionate, to do that. And then it's great because everybody's playing to their strengths and doing what they're really good about. And that doesn't make you get burned out usually. If you're doing things that you really aren't really into, like if I just had to testify at legislative hearings all day long, I would burn out so fast because that doesn't excite me. But put me in a room full of like 50 college student women who are going to be targeted to sell their eggs, and I get them all juiced up, I get excited. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to add? I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I think this was a really great conversation. So thank you.
No, I think it's good, but I think the only thing I would add is I would ask people to go to subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is the Center for Bioethics and Culture Network. Maybe if you can just put a link in whenever you promote this.
Yeah, definitely.
Because we do have a brand new film coming out in probably about 6 weeks, the Detransition Diaries, Saving Our Sisters, which is a nice documentary that's coming out on 3 young women in the United States who thought they were men and went down that path only to wake up and realize that was not a good thing for them. So, and like I said, all of our content on the channel is free. So I just, I want to make that kind of my primary commercial.
Oh yeah.
Free content.
I will promote the heck out of it. Don't worry.
Yeah.
And 6 weeks is sooner than I thought for the other film. So
well, don't tell my editor that. He probably would be mad to hear me. We are hoping we're telling people early fall. So they could be like September-ish.
That's awesome. We will, WLRN will certainly look into that as well and get people to go for it. So thank you
for having me back again. It was good to chat with you, Aurora. Have a great day.
Well, you too.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. I love hearing from women about what matters to us most. What feminism is meant to be about. Women. This is April No, WLRN Canadian member, signing off for now. Wishing all my sisters the happiest vestiges of summer.